everyone, and welcome to another episode of GCS Connect, the Leaders Series podcast. Today we've got Chris Burrell, who is the CTO of Landbay, which is an online peer-to-peer lending service. Really interesting conversation with Chris. He started as a software engineer within the business and has grown over the 6 years to becoming the CTO. And I think that tells you a lot about the business. It's fast growing, it's agile, and it's very flexible. And I think we talked a lot about the way a startup culture can really give a business culture and a working culture a real kind of incentive to grow. And I really like that in what he was talking about there that they have with Landbay. And then we talked quite a lot about technology, and he obviously thinks quite deeply about that. Looking closely at how the tech team works with the product team in order to create really flexible, customer-focused decisions. The importance of true agile and what the disadvantages of that. And we talked about things like chaos testing and how to kind of keep a straight path when there's lots of different strands of technology going on. But I think the real basis of that, and he comes from a consulting background, understanding what customers and what other parts of the business want from technology, is that he really puts a strong emphasis as a leader and a technology leader on that person-to-person relationship. And that links into everything about then Landbay coming back into the office in the future, and also how he views and works with people. I think it's really interesting to hear what he says about that and how he is creating one of the most innovative fintech companies out there at the moment. So here we go. It's Chris Burrell from Landbay. Hi there, Chris. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. And yourself?
Yeah, not too bad at all. Lots of stuff going on. It's Friday today, Friday the 18th of June, and it's the day that England are playing Scotland in the football. I don't know if are you a football fan, Chris?
I'm not. The only football I ever watch is the World Cup, and then my allegiances are torn between France, Scotland, and England. So
fantastic! So it'll be a difficult one for you. Or you're going to go on. Which side are you going to go for this afternoon?
I just take the winner side, and then whoever's the winner, that's where my allegiance will all the time.
Well, it's good that you can claim France, then, I think, because I think they're a lot more likely to win on this. Good stuff, excellent. But yeah, it's a rainy day in England today, so I've got my background on because it's so dark in my blinking room. But I've just said to Chris, he seems to find the only place in the world where the sun is out. So Chris, we've got Chris Burrell here today, who's the CTO of Landbay. 16 years industry experience, 6 years with Landbay, which is basically an online buy-to-let mortgage platform. Really looking forward to speaking to him, finding out about his journey as a leader and Landbay's journey as an organization. But Chris, do you just want to take us through a little bit about Landbay, about your role, and what you're really doing at the moment?
Yeah, so Landbay started really as a peer-to-peer lender. So we had people like you and me. We might have a few £100, or maybe it's a pensioner and they've got a bit more cash and wanted to make a reasonable return. And what we did is we said to those guys that if you place the money with Landbay, we'll match it to people who have got mortgages to fund. So they want a mortgage, and especially in the buy-to-let market. And so with enough people to lend money, then we can fund a mortgage. And so that was where Landbay started. And it became really evident that the retail market was good, but if we could latch on to some bigger funders, so think kind of big banks, building societies, that kind of thing, they might be able to fund mortgages also at a much higher volume.
Right. Okay.
And so about 2 years ago, we pivoted the business to focus solely on those larger institutional funders.
Sure.
And so my work at Landbay, I joined as the kind of only software engineer at the time, and then progressed and eventually as CTO as we kind of grew the team. So the tech team was basically 1 to now we've got a good 20 to 25 people in there. And similarly, the company was probably 10 to 15 when I joined, and we've got around the 100 mark now. And so really our kind of the journey of the company mirrored the journey of the tech that we've built. So we focus primarily on building a peer-to-peer platform to kind of matching hundreds of pounds against kind of hundreds of thousands of pounds and who gets which bit of the mortgage. And then recently we've been focusing more on the underwriting side, so equipping the internal people to Landbay, whether that's the underwriters assessing the risk of any particular applicant, or whether that's the completions team who are working with solicitors to make sure that all the kind of legal side of things is done. So we're building the kind of platform to have those controls, to automate, to make things smoother, both for our external customers as well as our internal customers. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of the kind of journey.
And I think it's really interesting, like you just said there, you joined as a developer and obviously have become that kind of leader. Is that the career path that was rolled out to you, or do you feel you've stepped up and taken those responsibilities? Because it's interesting that you kind of move into that range, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd done quite a number of different roles prior to that. So I worked on some of the larger kind of telco companies that we've got in the UK. So I can probably name all of them. I've possibly worked with most. So Vodafone, EE3. I did some work for a lot of them. So one of the big projects I did just before leaving, actually, my previous company was redesigning the EE shop online. Yeah. And so they're kind of large projects where you need quite a lot of kind of architectural background, design, and you're kind of designing for, for big, you kind of think Black Friday or Cyber Monday with someone like EE, you get a lot of traffic through there. So that was kind of my background, and it's a consultancy background also, which actually allowed me to see lots of different people, lots of different projects. So that kind of breadth of experience was relatively kind of both on the commercial side actually and the government side was relatively broad, which was helpful. And so I think when you join a startup of 10 people, whether you're the software engineer or the software engineer with your manager or something, your role on paper, and I think my contract probably still says I'm a software engineer, with a few letters recently, which is you've been promoted to this new title, but actually in practice you're the architect, you're the developer, you're working very, very closely with the product person to work out what is the right requirement. You're suggesting alternatives because there's only one of you, and so you want to make the development as fast as possible and take as many shortcuts as you can, but then you don't want to sacrifice the quality.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you get that constant trade-off, and so it's a very, very different role, a software engineer in the startup, when you're the only one or you're one of 3, 4, 5, to a software engineer and say, I was a consultancy previously with 1,000 people. And there it's not like you're a drop in the ocean, but your role is very much defined to here's some requirements that someone else maybe took, and then you're kind of walking through them and then you move project.
Yeah. So, and do you feel that background, like you said, as a consultant, is, if you were a more junior programmer listening to this or a software engineer, do you think in terms of a career path, that's a really important way to go? Because as a recruiter, I'm always, we look a lot for people who are client facing, so they can talk to the business, talk to customers about technology. That's particularly for a leader in technology, that's a very important part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think probably the most important skill is to be able to engage different people at different levels. So I can have a very technical conversation if need be, but I can also have a very business-like conversation. I think that we look at that in our interviews for other people joining Landbay, when we're primarily character-wise is almost more important than coding. A lot of people will pick up coding when they're 10, 11 these days. They're quite interested. There's kind of mobile apps you can do, and the coding itself, like the line of code to write, is relatively easy. And lots of people think coding's hard. Actually, you teach it at schools, people can pick them up really early. The bit that's harder to get in the market, at least so far as we can tell, is that kind of engaged person who's pushing, who's a part of the company, and it's kind of the success of the company matters to me, therefore I am going to do something, and it might not always be the same thing, but I'm going to challenge this. I'm going to see if we can do this faster, better, rather than here's a big document and let me go away and code it. And that's the kind of character we look for in our hiring, and I think we value really, really highly.
And that's the sort of environment you're building as a culture. Is very important to get that right in a startup, isn't it?
It is. I think the culture almost is everything. I mean, I walked into the office when I had my first interview with them and looked around and thought, is this it? I mean, it was so small, it's almost the size of, a couple of rooms. And actually you realize that you're going to be speaking to everyone every day. And so the culture is what makes it fun. It's what keeps you going through the ups and downs, and startups have got lots of ups and downs, whether that's kind of pressure against time, against money, whether that's the kind of, working out what are we actually selling, what is the product, how do we sell it, what's appealing. And so all of that actually is the people that carry you. And certainly the folk that I work with are brilliant, but actually they've become friends, and that's been an amazing experience. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, I very similar for myself. I mean, I joined GCS 25 years ago when we were 3 people, and obviously grown a lot since then. Part of a kind of group of 700 now, and you see those changes over those years, don't you? But it's great to have those people that have been on the journey with you. And I think what was important about what you said there is that people really care about the success, don't they? To really kind of buy into it, and that creates a great kind of bond. So yeah, and I think then you can overcome many challenges, can't you? That's when people will really kind of go into battle for the company, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think you can kind of cultivate that a bit in lots of different ways. So like our new joiners often shadow underwriters, and some have gone on the road with our sales team before the pandemic.
Sure.
Just to kind of get an impression, like who are our customers, our brokers, what are the questions they're asking, what are underwriters looking at on the screens, why are they asking those questions? And so that both kind of has the effect of bonding people together, but also just getting a sense of what Landbay's really at.
Is that developers as well? So is that technology people? So they'll really kind of get involved in, this is what it is.
Yeah, that's right. And it may be for some it's an hour shadowing. For others, if they're going on the road, it might be a half day, a day.
Right. Okay.
And at the same time, we try and do the reverse, get our stakeholders into things like sprint demos. We've got a Slack channel where every time we release, and we release quite frequently, but every time we release, something goes on there, and the business folk kind of say, "Oh, this has made a massive impact," and so you get that feedback, and so that kind of bringing people closer, I think does help create engagement.
Yeah, and would that be, one of your kind of priorities, when you think about your kind of development plan coming out of COVID and progressing the business forward? You talked a little bit more about things like microservices, that sort of thing within your development team. Is that where you're really trying to push forward now?
The culture side, or
the technology. You kind of created the culture, to kind of bring those together. And what sort of kind of technology plan have you got around that you can kind of really build?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it's hard always, obviously, to stay on the cutting edge, because by definition, the cutting edge is only cutting for so long. So we're actually in the process of building out a kind of a roadmap of simplification of productivity, because you really realize after 3-4 years of the platform kind of bumbling along, and you make those improvements here and there, and microservices kind of gives you a massive benefit to upgrading bits of the platform one at a time. But actually, there are some fundamentals of the platform that were relevant probably 5-6 years ago, especially if we had a peer-to-peer platform, which is kind of highly transactional versus a more underwriting risk type platform. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff we can simplify. And so whether it's new technologies, adopting some of the more cloud-ready stuff, so we can just remove responsibility from our devs to worry about it, and that's engaging for people also to kind of learn new things. So there's a bit of that. On the whole, though, because of the microservice architecture, the massive benefit there is to say, actually, we're changing the paradigm we're developing in, but we don't necessarily need to change the entire platform.
Sure.
So rather than an upgrade across the piece, we can just take one of those microservices and say, okay, well, we're going to upgrade the version of this, or we're going to bring in Kafka for this, or this makes more sense to have a non-relational database. And so we're going to use that there, and we don't need to use that for any of the other bits that we're building.
Yeah, I think that's right. And what I'm always interested in with businesses that are technology businesses is in finance. We obviously work with some of the big banks, and they would very much see themselves as a finance business. Do you guys see yourself as a technology business primarily, or would you very much see yourself as a kind of financial services provider? The reason I ask that is almost who drives the product. So you said obviously moving towards from the peer-to-peer side into a different format. Was that driven by technology, would you say, or by the leaders of the business on the finance side?
Yeah, I think it probably has been a bit of both. So for example, as a peer-to-peer, it'd be incredibly difficult to have any kind of sense of managing, thousands and thousands of customers owning little portions of mortgages. Doing that manually without tech would be impossible. And so actually the tech is the empowerment for that business model. Because we're working now more with funders,
sure.
Funders will have different risk appetites. And so we will want to be asking them to either adopt different parts of the market at a slightly different risk level, at different rates. And so there's those conversations happening over there. But at the same time, the product in particular, they're constantly working at kind of innovation of the platform internally. So how do we improve the customer's experience, the underwriter's experience? And so I probably would say we are a fintech. I mean, it's a cop-out answer, I guess. But the product we're selling, in other words, the mortgage, that's mostly driven by the finance folk. But the way we're selling it, that is very, very, in some ways, it's very similar. It's an application form, but it's all online. And what we work on now will be so much better than where a lot of the market is. But that is the tech side. And it is the custom experience. It is a mishmash of both. The customer needs to buy a product, but he needs to have a good experience to buy the product. And so, yeah.
Because when you're in a competitive environment, there's so many different options, isn't there? So you have to kind of react to the market, but you also have to react to how your customers are dealing with the system, how your customer base is growing. How do you get the information and the data on that feeds back into your development life cycle?
Yeah, so we've got a brilliant product team who sits under kind of Jace at Landbay, and he will do all sorts of things from the beginning of the cycle all the way to the end. So, for example, we will deliver a prototype of something we're thinking about, and then we'll have loads and loads of sessions with our customers and say, look, if something looked like this, what would be your first impression? And then we observe them as they use the prototype also, so that we can kind of tailor what we're going to do, kind of user testing. There's a lot of research, so we've occasionally commissioned external research on, anonymous. How do you, where do you rate? Which competitors do you rate in the market? And maybe they know Landbay's asking research, maybe they don't, and it gives you slightly different things, and so that gives us an insight. There's a whole lot of insight you can get from all the analytics. So, your standard kind of Google Analytics, but kind of automated CRMs and marketing.
Okay.
And so, if people are coming to your website and they've visited certain pages, then you know that you can kind of retarget them on some front. Or maybe our sales team have gone into the offices of brokers, and it's worth chasing them, and it's worth having another conversation. So the CRM could set all of that kind of stuff up automatically.
I guess for yourself, like having that different amount of information coming back and working in a competitive market, you have to be quite kind of agile in your development, right? Is that something that's kind of core to your development process?
Yeah, it is. And so our deployment pipelines of our software is engineered so that it takes 6 minutes from the time that the dev team is ready and things have been reviewed and approved and stuff like that. It takes 6 minutes for it to go through our test environment, automatically tested, and then onto production.
Wow.
And so that agility gets you don't need to think about what if this big project goes wrong, I need a kind of rollback plan, etc. Because actually, if it takes 6 minutes to put in, to revert it it probably only takes another 6 minutes. And so there's a lot of freedom that comes with pace, and as a result, there's a lot of freedom that comes with prioritization.
Because you can look at different things, make different decisions, break it as you're going along, can't you?
Yeah, and you can test things, so things don't need to be right 100% of the time. There's some things that do. So if we're keeping a financial ledger of transactions, you need to be absolutely bulletproof on what the amounts you're charging your customers are. But whether it's the button needs to be on the left or the right, whether it's the kind of, is this prominent enough to be used? Is this feature going to be really worth it? Can we deliver a tenth of it? And then we can deliver the other 90% if there's some engagement on it. And that's the kind of things where, because you can reprioritize quite quickly, you can run sprints quite regularly, then you get that agility to get some feedback. And so our product team actually do run quite a lot of surveys after we've released features. So look, what are the struggles? What are the pros? What difference has it made? Are you happy? Are you not happy? And that kind of feeds back. And so you get that kind of eternal cycle.
And I can imagine one of the disadvantages of that is you being the leader, the CTO, as it were. Although you say it still says software engineer in your contract. I'm going to call you a CTO, Chris. Is that at some point someone has to make the decision? Is that one of the disadvantages? You've got so many different elements of, like, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this.
Yeah. So
one person has to say, no, this is what we're going to do. One person has to take that call, right?
Yeah, and sometimes that's quite difficult. So the way we're set up in Landbay is that Jace is the CPO, so Chief Product Officer, and so thankfully a lot of those decisions come to him, because sometimes you're trying to say, is this thing that looks more like an apple more important than this thing that looks more like an orange? So the sales teams will be able to prioritize within the sales team what we need from a sales perspective, but how do you compare that to what the underwriters need, the completion team processing the mortgage to legal completions, and compared to what the brokers need. So the kind of trying to do that side of things becomes incredibly difficult. And the perennial problem with any startup is resource. You don't have enough people to do the work. I mean, we've got 3-4 years of worth of work ahead to do. And my role is actually, the challenge is probably more the visibility for me. So because things can change quite quickly, my responsibility primarily is on the kind of technical architecture. And so I need to be involved in all of those decisions that actually have bigger impact, but small decisions. We've got really bright people in the team, and so we can leave those things to be made. And it's a spectrum. Where do you get engaged? Because actually the higher up you are in the organization, the more breadth you have, but the less depth of knowledge. And so you need to be able to rely solidly on your team. And at the same time, because they're in a team rather than all teams, you need to be bringing that communication across the teams. And that's probably one of the larger challenges.
And so therefore, you as the leader, would you have an ongoing plan like this, the strategy, this is the vision of where we're going? Obviously, keep me up to date with how that's going, but for you, it's very much that road forward.
Yeah, that's right. So the roadmap's kind of split for one roadmap per team, essentially. And then we have all sorts of sessions, either at the exec level or at the tech team level, or product and tech together to kind of sync up. So all the team leads meet regularly, twice a week. All the architects meet regularly. And some of that isn't to take decisions at all. It is information sharing. By the way, I'm working on this, it might impact you. And because the pace is so fast, you need to have those conversations, because if you have those conversations once a quarter saying, look, these are all the things we've delivered, that is far too late. And you'll redo the same work, or you'll undo someone's work, or you'll kind of threaten what other teams are doing. And so that, again, Agile is built on, close comms, hence, things like stand-ups.
And I guess if you're kind of moving forward in this kind of fast-paced environment, which is what I'm really taking for this, with things like kind of chaos testing and kind of automating everything, that level of communication and that level of leadership is so important, because otherwise it could be chaos, couldn't it?
Yeah, and that is one interesting thing that chaos testing is, and that people have got different kind of ideas of what that should be in the industry. The way we use it is to train our support capabilities. So our engineers build stuff and then they run it. We don't have a support team. We don't have a QA team. Our engineers write the test for the code, and then that's reviewed. It's reviewed at design. It's reviewed at code review stage. But we do rely on them to fix the code if they're putting broken code into production. And so that actually gives that kind of culture of accountability and team accountability. You know, if Joe Blogs does this thing and it brings the team's reputation down, or it means the teams has to focus another 4 hours or 2-3 days on fixing it, that's bad news. And so there's that kind of cycle, which is actually quite a healthy cycle of you build it, you're running it, and therefore we're kind of looking to you to make sure it works. And so occasionally what we'll do generally on our test environments is we'll introduce some chaos. So we'll break something and then we'll say, look, consider this to be, you know, an incident. And then we observe. And so some people observe and obviously others are kind of, and then you're kind of tuning people's troubleshooting capabilities, but you're also tuning the operation and process, the communication with the rest of the business. So we literally send emails out saying, this is a test, this is a major incident, we're telling people there's some escalation and so on.
So is it, I mean, just layperson's terms, again, it's a little bit like having a fire alarm, a proper fire alarm,
Absolutely.
right? Where you all go out the office and all stand in the different queues and someone's got the luminous jacket on, you know.
That's right.
In
And
an IT version.
Yeah, and then what we do after the incident, after that fire alarm, is we have what we call a postmortem, and we say, look, what went well, what didn't. You know, did someone put that jacket on? Did we actually tell the customers that something was impaired? How long did it take to get this thing up to scratch? And sometimes it is more about the process and training those kind of muscle skills, muscle memory, rather than the thing that was broken, because things in life will break. Right, and that's a fact, and it was always going to be something different that you expect. But having those muscle memories to say, look, here's where we look first, here's the people we tell, here's where we register the bug in our Jira, etc. So I get that visibility going. That's where you get that kind of, you know, fast-paced, solve it before it becomes too much of a problem.
I think that's really interesting because obviously, like, even when you've thought about kind of Agile, there's always been the QA testing, the pair programming, that sort of thing. You've almost done it always done developments before. I'm not a developer, but in quite a structured way, even in iterations. Like, we've got our iterations and we test it, put it into the thing. Whereas what we're saying here, and this is something that's relatively new, I think, is that what you really need to do is kind of test it in a real environment, in a real life kind of disaster environment, which is really real, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is some stuff you might even want to do in your production environment. So the things that are not necessarily impacting, but they would be impacting 2 days from now. So, you know, slowly building up some disk space, the server will run out of space. Are the teams going to react fast enough? And so that kind of stuff you can probably do, but obviously you don't want to be taking the system down. And other stuff maybe you do out of hours. But yeah, on the whole, you do that kind of disaster test and say, look, are we qualified? Do we still know what's running? And again, that puts the focus on automation, because you have to have your prod environment, production, to be as close as possible to your test environment that you're doing. And if you don't do that, and if you're doing everything manually with microservice, etc., you're just not going to have that, and it's not going to be a real test.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think about that, I mean, what we just talked about there was quite a lot of human reaction. Maybe I was talking about human reaction. We talk a lot on these within technology about automated processes and automated development even. Do you think it's really important to have that human touch? Because what the way I see it, and we had an interesting podcast a while ago with a guy called Robert Elliott Smith, and he was talking about human intuition versus automation. Do you think it's important to have humans at the helm, as it were, when these things go wrong? Otherwise, it's going to just make it exponentially worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some elements where, I mean, I think if you come back to what software is, ultimately software was built initially to help people. It wasn't, you know, people thought that we were going to get rid of printers when the first computer printer came. That's not the case. And but people still use computers because it's providing a service,
Yeah.
and it's providing a service to users. So whether it's the developer, and therefore automation helps him because it's something less that he needs to do, or whether it's a customer because it's an online portal they can log on. Software is there to help, and automation ought to be the same. You're not, even when people are talking about AI, it's trying to help the sales and marketing team know where to spend their budgets and stuff like that. And so the human touch is absolutely vital, and we're not ever in fact, even in Landbay, we're not ever going to be able or willing to do a 100% AI driven kind of decision on the behalf of the underwriter, because actually we value the underwriter skill. It's quite forensic. It is difficult technically, but actually there's some intuition to that. I'd like to have a conversation about this because this feels dodge or this feels good, and I want to. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I guess there's two questions coming out of this. Obviously we've talked a lot on the podcast about COVID in the last 12 months, and I know you guys are planning to get back in the office soon on a more regular basis. A lot of what you've got here is working in a very kind of agile, flexible way. Yep. So I guess you guys must have been prepared to work from home. But do you think that the aspects of what you just talked about around the chaos testing, automate everything, the kind of true agile, has that been hindered in any way by not working in the office together, would you say, or has it not really had an effect?
So I think if you take just the kind of tools and processes, I think one would say they've worked. They might have been a bit slower, but they've worked. I think if you take the people engagement, and people engagement is so critical to both staff retention, but also generally just happiness in your job and quality that comes out.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people would say working remotely, every conversation becomes quite transactional. You're having a meeting, it's a half an hour meeting, it's a quarter hour meeting, but it's about a topic. The kind of meeting around the coffee, the turning around from your desk and saying, actually, what you need to do is this, and just having that interchange, that is a lot harder in a remote environment. And I think a lot of people who, I think some of the folk in Landbay are going in once a week at the moment, and they're really appreciating that, both from a mental health perspective, from a team engagement perspective, from a fun, just having lunch in the park makes a massive difference. Whereas I suspect at home, a lot of people might have a half-hour lunch, but maybe it's at their desk and they're working through.
That's right.
The culture impact is a big thing.
Yeah, my dog doesn't generally have a good conversation; just kind of looks at me and pants. Yeah. But I mean, I myself, I went into our London office. I think I said first time since March 2020. I put it up on my LinkedIn and everything. I got very excited. It was very good actually, because one of the beautiful things was there was no one on the train. So that was always the way coming from Reading to London. And I was always stuck up against the door, really, really squashed. Now there's about 2 people on the train, so I was able to lounge. So it's like the perfect commute now. So that won't last very long, but I should enjoy it while it lasts. But does that then, I mean, thinking about the talent that you're going to be looking, obviously Landbay is really accelerating as a business. Will that change the type of talent that you're looking for on the market, do you think?
Yeah, I think I'd probably put it the reverse. I think the talent who previously was looking at Landbay as an option may be looking elsewhere, primarily because they've experienced remote work and it works for them. And so some people might want to be living in Brighton or up north and still want to work for companies based in London, and that's great if that works for them. I think we value the interchange, whether that's tech to tech or tech people to the rest of the business.
Yeah, like you said, the underwriters going on the road with them, being involved in the business.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we believe fairly strongly that actually that makes you a better software engineer. If you know your customer, you know what makes them tick, and therefore you care about the quality that you're delivering to them. And so that side of things, that is incredibly difficult to get remotely. And so when we go back, we're going back for a 3-day week in the office, where you get a flexible day and 2 fixed, and the others are kind of freer. A lot of companies will be okay to be 5 days remote, and I think some financial companies have announced 5 days back in the office already. Yeah, so you'll get a whole mix of people, And it really will come down to what is the priority
decision
in the candidate's mind and in the staff member. Yeah.
And I think that comes back to a company making a decision, as it were, like this is how we are going to do it, and then you have to stick with that, don't you? And you have to know what's right for your company, your culture, as we started talking about. So
post-pandemic, some of that stuff becomes a lot easier. So organising team events and organising people to go out for a drink after work, and these things are so natural, and yet they're so foreign these days.
I know. Well, I went for lunch with a colleague in a pub, and we were like, this is just so normal. So it's things that are normal, it just seem strange now, don't they? And,
absolutely.
So but no, it's great to see it. And to me, Landbay is obviously going to set itself up to be a great company to work with, and already a great company to work with. You've been there through the journey. What are the things that you think have remained central to the culture that you think make Landbay a great company to work for?
Yeah, I think everyone's very approachable. So whether that's the CEO, John, or anyone on the exec, or throughout the whole company, we're actually just quite happy to have conversations with each other. He might sit next to the tech folk one day, next to sales the next day, etc. And I think that is a big thing, the kind of open transparency, just kind of being together, absolutely key. And I think we care. So we care if someone's hurting. Then there's a tech problem, maybe we can solve it, or vice versa. If there's something that's quite difficult to do from the tech side, actually we'll cut it out, and because it's kind of making life easier for people. So I think just those things.
And for my final question, we've talked a lot on the technology side and the people side and the culture side, but you on a personal side, what's the most important thing that you've learned on your journey as a leader within Landbay and previous that you think is important that you use as a leader yourself?
I think probably a consultant would break things down, like tools, processes, and people, and that's a fairly standard consultancy paradigm. And I think it's relatively easy to build tools. On the whole, you get bright software engineers. You can build pretty much anything. The whole AI stuff is an example of that. Processes, they're kind of at your tips, but they link to the process people and tools, and the people, managing people's careers, keeping them engaged, the team structures that are efficient and not efficient. I think I've certainly learned that there's a lot you can do, and a lot of good thing you can do, and a lot of harm you can do by either shuffling teams around or shuffling them too much, pairing people with the right people, hiring the wrong people, hiring the right people, and actually the people challenges, not the people are challenges, but the challenges that involve people, whether that's hiring or managing career or growth, those tend to be the things that I found more stretching, and probably and certainly harder than writing a few lines of code and getting something out the door. And I think probably also more rewarding. So when people have really enjoyed working on something, and then there's loads of recognition coming from the team that's benefiting, there's like celebration there, and I think that's been really, for me, that's been one of the growth areas and the nicest areas to grow in.
That's right. Yeah, it's always funny, isn't it, when you think about managers you had when you were a trainee or a new person, you're like, why are they doing that, and that, kind of moaning to your colleagues, and then when you get to that point of being a manager and you're leading the teams, and you're, I see now, I see how it works and stuff. But I guess that's all a process of learning that we're going through. But Chris, it's been great to speak to you today. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great day. And
thanks.
Good luck in the football.
Thanks for having me.